Okay, how's it going, y'all? We're going to read some more Lenin today. This is The Famine and the Reactionary Duma. This came out in 1911. And it was published, where was it published? Raboshaya Gazeta. Let's go ahead and get into this. This is the Famine and the Reactionary Duma. Not so long ago, under the influence of last year's harvest, the hack journalists confidently held forth on the beneficial results of the, quote, new agrarian policy, end quote. And taking their cue from them, some naive persons proclaimed that there had been a turn in our agriculture and that it was on the upgrade throughout Russia. Now, as if time to coincide with the 5th anniversary of the decree of November 9, 1906, the famine and crop failure, which have gripped nearly half of Russia, have shown most graphically and incontrovertibly how much wanting, lying, or childish simplicity there was behind the hopes placed in Stolypin's agrarian policy. Even according to the government calculations, the authenticity and modesty of which were demonstrated during preceding spells of famine, the crop failure has affected 20 gubernias, 20 million people, are entitled to receive relief, end quote. In other words, they are bloated from hunger and their farms are being ruined. Kakosvav would not be Minister of Finance and the head of the counter-revolutionary government if he did not make, quote, encouraging statements. There is really no crop failure, you see, but merely a poor harvest. Hunger, quote, does not cause disease, end quote, but on the contrary, sometimes cures disease. The stories about the sufferings of the famine-stricken are all newspaper inventions, as is eloquently testified to by the governors on the contrary. The economic conditions of the localities affected by the poor harvest are not so bad at all, end quote. The idea of giving free food to the population is pernicious, end quote. And finally, the measures taken by the government are sufficient and timely. The head of the constitutional government forgot to mention his brilliant invention, designed to combat the famine, namely that police agents should be given authority to organize, quote, famine relief. Public aid, even from legal liberal societies, has now been abolished, and a Saratov police agent, as the only champion of the starving, has been able to spend freely in taverns the funds entrusted to him to aid the famine-stricken. Naturally, the feudal landowners on the right were enthusiastic about the detailed and, so to speak, all-embracing speech of the chairman of the council ministries, Deputy Vishnevsky, on November 9th. Naturally, the groveling Octobrists promptly stated in their motion to pass to next business that the government has taken timely measures to combat the effects of the crop failure. And one of their leaders, by no means an ordinary mortal, indulged in a profound discourse on, quote, unrestricted circulation of canned fish as a means of providing the population with desirable food, end quote. Hunger, typhus, scurvy, people eating carrion for which they fight dogs, or bread mixed with ashes and manure such as was demonstrated with the State Duma. All these things do not exist as far as the Octobrists are concerned. To them, the word of the minister is law. And the cadets? Even on this issue, they refrained from voicing a straightforward opinion on the infamous behavior of the government and found nothing better than through the medium of Cutler, one of their speakers, to, quote, draw reassuring conclusions from comprehensive speech of the chairman of the Council of Ministers, end quote, sitting of November 9th, and in formulating their motion to pass to next business, they gently described the activity of the government as being merely insufficiently systematic, inadequate, and not always timely. The question of relief and of its organization is but one aspect of the matter, as the Social Democrat deputy, Comrade Belousov, correctly pointed out in his speech. No less important is the fundamental question which arises each time the discussion turns on the famine, the question of the causes of famine and of the measures to combat crop failures. The feudal landowners on the right have a, quote, very simple solution. The loafing music must be made to work hard, still harder, and then he'll deliver the goods. Markov, the second, the diehard from Kursk, thinks that it is horrible that out of 365 days in the year, the music works only 55 through 70 days, doing nothing for the 300 days, merely warming his back on the stove and demanding a ration from the government, end quote. The semi-feudal landowners among the nationalists and the Octobrists take a deeper view of the matter. In line with their duty to sing the praises of the authorities, they are still trying to persuade people that, quote, the question of famine will be radically involved when the land passes from the hands of the feeble and the drunkards into the hands of the strong and the sober, end quote. Quote, when the reform inaugurated by the late P.A. Stolypin is fully implemented, when the stake on the strong is won, end quote. Kelipovsky's speech at the sitting of the Duma on November 9th. However, the more far-sighted among the recent defenders of the decree of November 9th are already beginning to sense that the breath of death is hovering over this, quote, great reform, end quote. In Lvov, a deputy from Saratov, who was, as he declared, still is in favor of the law of November 9th, shared with the Duma the following impressions he had gained from contact with reality. All those things you are saying here in the State Duma somehow seem terribly removed from the actual suffering which one sees with one's own eyes. It is necessary to exercise great caution. It is necessary to spare that section of the population whom some people are inclined to ignore. As a result of the law of November 9th, many newcomers have appeared in some gubernias, including Saratov. Land prices have risen, and the condition of the poor population has become extremely difficult. Terrible hatred and condemnation are welling up among the peasant poor, and some measures ought to be taken against this state of affairs. For relying on the strong by no means implies that the poor peasants ought to be hastened to their doom, and the left perish in poverty, and so on and so forth. In brief, the impressions gained from contact with reality, end quote, are beginning to open the eyes of this landowner who is in favor of the law of November 9th. The seeds of this immeasurably more profound doubt as to salutary effect of Stolypin's, quote, agrarian reform, end quote, have been planted by this year's famine in the minds of the right-wing peasants. The motion put forward by Andreychuk, a right-wing peasant, that the government shall, at an early date, introduce into the State Duma a bill to limit the amount of land in the hands of big landowners. A motion supported by all the right-wing peasants, and even by rural priests, show more than anything else along what the lines the peasants, even the rights among them, think the struggle against the famine should be conducted. The demand voiced by Andreychuk, the demand that comes direct from the peasant world, provides additional proof. Recall the statement of the right and left-wing Ps and deputies, suggesting the compulsory alienation of land and estates in order to provide allotments for those who possess little land. Recall the speeches of the peasant deputies in the debate on the decree of November 9th, etc., showing how deeply the need for an agrarian revolution is penetrating into the minds even of the right-wing peasants, to what great extent even they regard the struggle against famine as inseparable from the struggle for land, end quote. A real struggle against famine is inconceivable without the appeasement of the peasants' land hunger, without the relief from the crushing pressure of taxes, without an improvement in their cultural standard, without a decisive change in their legal status, without the confiscation of landed estates, without a revolution. In this sense, this year's crop failure is a new reminder of the doom that awaits the entire existing political system, the June 3rd monarchy. Okay, well, thank y'all for tuning in. This is, Marxist Off. Follow me, please, at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, Medium. And also you can get me in Telegram, Marxist_Saw. Feel free to, reach me there. And y'all have a great day, and Dodada Goi.